Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today we're celebrating the end of summer, aka the best time of year for produce, and I'm gonna cook all of this summer veg into a beautiful lasagna. I would say that this recipe is an incredible amount of work, but it's gonna be amazing. I make a version of this dish every summer, multiple times this summer. But it takes different forms and I incorporate different veg into it. This is not one of the classic Italian lasagnas that we think about where it's like a super long cooked bolognese or bechamel. This is like a very sort of fresh version using a lot of veg and not really like a heavy tomato sauce. When I make this, I'm usually using dried pasta. I'm taking the extra mile this time and doing fresh pasta sheets, and it really creates something so special, but this can definitely be modified to be less work. So to me, what I really, really want in a lasagna is super, super thin layers with a lot of pasta in between. So that's what we're going for today, and that's part of why this becomes a lot of work is because there's a lot of slicing and cooking of these really thin layers, but it's just so fun to eat where you can peel away the layers one by one. And to me, lasagna should be a pasta dish. I feel like a lot of times lasagna is just a couple of sheets of pasta separated by a lot of sauce, and I don't want that. I want to really focus on the pasta. So here's the other thing about lasagna. Sometimes I feel like that top layer gets dried out and it's not so much crispy as it is hard. And so of course I want crispiness. I think one of the pitfalls that lasagna often falls into is it's very mushy. And so it's I want a textural contrast. And so I have a very specific way of addressing that. And that is to griddle a slice of lasagna. Again, this is a very, very hyper specific lasagna that I'm gonna make, but it's so special. This time of year is tomato, eggplant, zucchini season. I'm not making a tomato sauce. I'm just going to roast the tomatoes, and then that becomes the kind of bright, fresh, acidic component to the recipe. There is not a separate sauce, but there is a cheese filling. So I have some strained ricotta here. I'm gonna make a filling with some parm, fresh mozzarella, a couple eggs. I have garlic, red pepper flakes, salt, pepper, olive oil. And then of course here I have one recipe of fresh egg pasta. So check out the episode where I make ravioli, where I'll show you the recipe. It's really easy to put together. It makes a beautiful dough. So I already made that because, again, this recipe is actually a ton of work, frankly, as I was realizing last night at 11:30 when the lasagna went into the oven. It was a lot. Okay, so this recipe uses every piece of equipment in my entire house. I have my stand mixer with a pasta roller attachment. Obviously, if you have just a countertop crank, use that. I have a food processor for putting together that ricotta filling. I'm gonna use my made-in carbon steel griddle for cooking the veg and for griddling the slices. I have a sheet tray. I'm gonna roast my tomatoes. I have a pot for cooking the pasta. I'm using a Pullman pan. If you don't have a Pullman pan, because it's not a common thing, you could do a couple loaf pans, or you could just do a regular lasagna pan, that's fine. It's a lot of stuff. I need basil. Full disclosure, the lasagna I made last night to have a swap, it was late and Harris wasn't home and I didn't want to go outside and get the basil, so the one that you'll see later, it doesn't have basil in it. I'll top it with a little fresh basil.
What else are you growing out here?
So this is our herb garden. We have scallions, chive, rosemary, parsley. Every year we kind of do a slightly different mix, mostly based on what we didn't use a lot of the previous year. We always have too much basil and kind of got sick of pesto, frankly. I wish we'd grown tarragon because I like making green goddess dressing. Our dill did not do great. Everything else did really well. A little basil bouquet. That's plenty. We definitely have some green beans we can harvest. It's every day there's more. But I'll come back later and do this. Okay, so right now I'm gonna focus on tomatoes. Could things be trellised a little more nicely? Definitely. A couple of these little guys.
How did your tomatoes do this year?
Our tomatoes do so well in our garden. We do not have good luck with eggplant, so we gave up, and I went to the farmer's market and got local eggplant. But tomatoes really thrive, and we have some amazing varieties this year. The sun golds always do well. I'm gonna pick some of these. And I've forgotten all the names of the varieties, but there's like a striped green one that's been awesome. There's this like kind of mid-sized, it's like a Berkeley tie-dye, I think is what it's called. This kind of mid-size, like green and red striped one. These have been great. We have these little tiny cherry tomatoes. Our zucchini are they're basically done. I'm gonna see if there's any lingering zucchini that are ready to harvest. One thing we did a good job of this year is like picking them young and not letting them get enormous, because it's like, you might be like, oh, I'll come back tomorrow and get that zucchini, and then the next day it has like quadrupled in size and it's like full of seeds. I'm gonna get some more of these sun golds. You see our kabocha, our winter squash?
Those are roosters.
The roosters are a pain and a menace, and they harass everyone who comes. But it's because Harris is a sap and adopted roosters that no one wanted.
I'll distract them.
All right, thanks, Harris. There's three main components for the lasagna. There's the pasta, which I've already made the dough. There's the ricotta filling, and then there's the veg. So I want to start by doing the tomato because that actually takes quite a while. I roast them at a low temp, so I'm going to get my tomatoes out onto this little sheet tray. This goes in our like little countertop convection oven. I'm not doing precise amounts here, and I'm going to rinse the tomatoes that I just brought in from the garden. So like, I'm not doing precise amounts because I'm kind of just using what we have and what came out of the garden. When I made the lasagna last night, I ran out of tomato for the last 2 layers. It's fine. And I'm gonna roast these at a low temp, so that's why they take a while. So I roast them at 275. When you roast something that long, you're like cooking them, but you're also kind of dehydrating them. And so it's actually a great preservation method, especially if you use a lot of olive oil. But I just like it because it really kind of maintains a lot of the fresh tomato flavor. I mean, look, what I'm really making, I feel like, is more of a layered pasta dish than like what people would think of as lasagna. But what I don't like about a lot of lasagna is like it has a super long cooked flavor. So the goal here is to preserve a lot of kind of fresh vegetable flavor. And that's why I'm not doing like a long cooked tomato sauce. For these slightly larger ones, tie-dye ones, I'm gonna just cut them in half, I think. So everything else was already washed. Gardening is amazing. One thing it took me a while to like fully realize is that actually where most of the work is like the harvesting and figuring out what to do with the stuff that you grow. Like the easy part is kind of like putting everything in the ground and kind of the fun part. So like over the last several years as we've been learning and kind of improving and like, you know, making a new plan based on what worked or didn't work the previous year, I've become a little bit better at like understanding when to harvest stuff, what to do with it. One thing we keep doing, which is kind of stupid, is like sowing all the beans at the same time. So it's like you end up with, you know, like 3 pounds of beans or something in 1 week, and it's a lot. Anyway, the point is that like it's great to like have a couple preserving methods under your belt. For the tomatoes, I'm just going to do a lot of olive oil, a little salt, and then I'm also going to throw some garlic cloves on here. I'm just going to smash them. And what's great about the garlic cloves at a low temperature, like 275, is they just kind of slowly caramelize and soften and become like really sweet and delicious. You can leave the paper on, actually. That's often like I leave the skin on, but just because I smash them, it's easy to pull off. So I'm going to do that. Get them kind of tossed and everything. Okay, now this is going to go into the oven, 275 for about an hour, just until they're burst. Don't worry, we'll still be making lasagna in an hour. This is 24 ounces of ricotta cheese. And again, the quantities are not like super precise because it depends on how much filling you put, how many layers, how big your pan is, but this should make more than enough filling. And I drained it overnight, so you can see it let off. This is probably about 1/4 cup of liquid. And the idea is to get rid of a lot of the water content so that you can replace it with egg. I have 2 eggs. And the egg is what produces a filling that will set and has that like custardy texture that you want. And then I also have some fresh mozzarella. This is 8 ounces, and then some parm. So I'm gonna grab my food processor. This makes a pretty enormous lasagna, but I think people are used to that because you make it in like a lasagna pan. So it makes that size lasagna, basically. If you try to grate Parmesan cheese on like a box grater or a rasp style grater, you get something very like fluffy, versus if you do it in a food processor, you get a more pebbled texture. And I almost always actually prefer the like more pebbly texture. So this is, you don't actually even really need to see me do this. I just have to do this before I can move on to the next part. So I need about 8 ounces of parm. And save the rind. That's a great thing to have for like soup making or anything like that. All right, let's start here with this. That was not too loud. All right, I'm gonna get this into a separate container. So it has this sort of, there's some sort of slightly larger pieces and some finer pieces, but that's fine. So this is probably about 8 ounces, which is approximately 2 cups of grated. Maybe slightly less, but that's okay. So there's parm that goes into the ricotta filling, mostly for flavor, but then it goes separately as like its own layer with the tomatoes. Okay, so now, because I already have my food processor out, I am going to use the grating disc to grate my fresh mozzarella. I'm not using low moisture because I just really, really like the milkiness of fresh mozzarella. But in general, with lasagna or like any kind of, how do I do this? Do I remember how to do this? Generally though, with any kind of lasagna like, or layered pasta, a lot of it is about like moisture control. And like you don't want to introduce a lot of excess moisture into just like the whole layering and assemblage. Cooking the tomatoes beforehand, for instance, like a lot of these steps are about kind of managing the amount of moisture that's going into the dish. I actually don't know how well this is going to work because this is very soft. So we'll see if I can get this to grate. There we go. I kind of pulverized it in a way that isn't my favorite, but it's fine. Okay. So, all right, so that's my mozzarella. It's a little finer. It's not really in shreds. It's more like in crumbs, but that's fine. All right, I'm gonna get this onto my plate here. The mozzarella adds like, obviously the intense milkiness, which is kind of like what is good about mozzarella, but it also gives it like a little bit of like that cheesy, a slight pull, because as it melts into the filling. So it's really delish. Okay, so now I'm gonna get my blade back in there. I'm going to add my strained ricotta.
Were you wanting more like shredded parm, like a pizza?
No, because it all just like gets blended into the filling. It's just distinct from if you do it yourself on a box grater. Okay, so in goes the ricotta. And I'm gonna add my 2 eggs. I'm also going to add 1 clove of grated raw garlic. I'm saying 1 clove because these are actually enormous cloves. If you're using like more regular sized garlic, you can do 2. It's really to taste. This maintains a little bit of like a raw garlic flavor, which I really like. And obviously there's garlic with the tomatoes, but that becomes like very caramelized and kind of sweet. So it's just a different flavor. So I'm gonna grate this in. I've done fillings before where I added like herbs to the ricotta mixture, which you can do like parsley. You could do the basil in here. The problem is if you do it in the food processor, you end up making like a green filling because it gets kind of pureed in. So, I mean, which is fine if you don't mind that look. But if you want to keep it separate, then just add it at the very end. So I'm going to season this with a little bit of salt and then a big pinch of red pepper flakes. And now blend this. So the idea of doing this is you're kind of like whipping the ricotta and it's making it super, super smooth and silky so that you don't have as much of that like really fine curd texture that you get with ricotta. And definitely do whole milk ricotta. Don't do like part skim. Okay. So now that's really, really smooth. I'm gonna grab a spatula to scrape down the sides. So now I'm going to add my fresh mozzarella. All of that's gonna go in. And I don't really want to like blend this into, I don't want it to break down fully into the ricotta, so I'm just gonna kind of pulse it in so that it mixes basically. Oh, I forgot. I'm gonna add like about a half cup of the grated parm as well. And that's gonna add salt too. So you wanna be, everything's kind of like already pre-salted and we're just seasoning as we go each component to make sure that the final lasagna isn't either like under-seasoned or over-seasoned. So that looks great. This is our filling. I'll show you what that looks like. It has this like almost whipped texture. It's gonna be so good. I'm gonna just stir a little salt into it. So now I wanna get this into a piping bag, which is going to make assembly a lot easier. I definitely could scrape out more from the food processor, but I'm gonna overfill my pastry bag, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. Pasta made, tomatoes roasting, ricotta filling done. I'm now going to we're gonna go over to the stove and I'm gonna start cooking my veg. Eggplant and zucchini, abundant this time of year, 2 of my favorite vegetables, but they can be easily not delicious. And that is if they're undercooked. So like, actually I've had like raw zucchini where I'm like, I guess this is good, like thinly sliced. Raw eggplant is not really palatable to me, at least at all. So to me, the key for cooking each of these vegetables is like high heat, a lot of browning, making sure they're really, really cooked. And then it's gonna get all baked into the lasagna, so then it's gonna kind of cook again. What I love about the experience of eating lasagna is all the layers. And so I'm going to cut these really, really thin, and they are going to get layered into the lasagna in like these almost paper thin sheets. So you could do this on a mandolin, but they're kind of big and it's not very effective actually, especially depending on the size of your mandolin. So I'm gonna cut them by hand and I end up cutting, actually have been thinking about this recently. I feel like my knife skills have gotten worse, which is weird because you would think like the more you do it, the better you get. I don't know. If they're a little uneven, it's fine. It doesn't really end up making any difference. So just do your best, but we're going for something like less than 1/4 inch thick. So I'm peeling the eggplant. Partly where this dish started, where the idea of it started, there's 2 places where it started. One is basically eggplant parm and the idea of like a less breaded, kind of less heavy eggplant parm. And it's just the idea of like layers of tomato and cheese and eggplant. And I was like, well, what if you replace the breading with pasta? And then that's kind of how I got to like the idea of like an eggplant lasagna. And the other kind of inspiration for specifically what I'm making today is a dish that I had probably 10 years ago at a restaurant that's now closed called Del Posto, which is like a fine dining Italian restaurant in Manhattan. And The chef there, who was a longtime chef, Mark Ladner, had a dish with something called 100-layer lasagna. And that's the inspiration for how I'm putting the dish together. It was like a slab of this like incredible, like such thin layers. And then I don't think they griddled it, but it was so good. Anyway, that's why I'm making it in a loaf pan. Let me get rid of my scraps. Thank you. Sometimes with eggplant, there's like a flat side, it's oval. So there's like a side that feels more flat. So I like to kind of shave off a piece from that side and then lay it flat. And then just start cutting my slabs. And I'm cutting it lengthwise, really trying to keep the layers thin. If they're a little uneven, that's fine. I would actually go thinner rather than thicker. So here's like a good example. It's like this side is thinner than this. It really doesn't matter. As it cooks, it loses volume and it'll kind of collapse down anyway. I have my griddle. I'm using my trusty made in carbon steel griddle behind me. And that's just because I want something with a lot of surface area to try to cook what ends up being like a lot of slices of vegetables as quickly as possible. When I've done this in the past, I've roasted the slices at high heat, and that also works, and it's like a little bit more hands-off. It takes a little bit longer, but you also don't tend to get as much browning on the slices if you do it that way. You could broil them if your broiler is pretty powerful, but the idea is really just to like get these slices individually cooked and to get some color on them. The quantity of veg is not really precise. I'm just using a couple of eggplant and a few kind of smallish zucchini. I'm gonna do the zucchini the exact same way. I'll show you just really quickly. This you could do on a mandolin. It's a little bit easier than the eggplant, but same idea where I kind of like shave off a piece, then I have a flat surface for resting it. And I'm just cutting it into these kind of long, thin planks. All right, so I'm gonna finish cutting the veg that I have, and then I'm gonna go over to the griddle, which is preheating over medium-high heat. So you want like a lot of heat to get everything browned. And I'm just gonna kind of sear everything until it's soft and browned, olive oil, salt, pepper, that's it. And then we can move on to the next step, which is pasta rolling. Not to brag or anything, but I will say that our eggs make incredibly yellow, beautiful pasta. This is the dough I made last night. This starts with an 8-ounce portion of flour, so it's like a little under 2 cups. And this is a nice quantity for making my lasagna sheets. This is rested. I'm gonna divide this into 2 portions for rolling out, and I'll keep one wrapped up while I roll out the first. I have a little bit of extra all-purpose flour here. That's just bench flour. Behind me, I have a sheet tray with a piece of parchment, and I also wanna get out a little wheel cutter and my ruler. That's gonna help me cut the right size sheets. All right, I can't find my ruler, so I have the tape measure. And I'm gonna show you, this is the size loaf pan that I'm gonna use for making the lasagna. You can see it's very tall. This is a Pullman pan, so I'm making for a Pullman loaf, which is a type of bread. It has a lid. It has super high sides, and that's because we're making this very tall, like, you know, very layered dish, and we're gonna bake it in here. So I'm gonna help use this as like my guides for cutting the right size pasta sheets. What's so cool about making your own pasta for lasagna is like you can make the sheets the exact size you need, and it's none of the like fitting together like a puzzle, you know, the dried lasagna sheets from the box. I'm going to start by just kind of rolling out this portion of dough with my rolling pin, and I'm gonna set the pasta machine to the widest setting.
We have 2 of these, right?
Yeah. So the goal with rolling out pasta sheets is evenness, and also like to kind of make like squared off a kind of rectangular shape so that you don't have to cut away as much trim. All right, so I'm gonna start by running this through the machine a few times. This is mostly yolk. There's 1 whole egg, 5 yolks. So it just makes, especially using like our eggs, which are so brightly colored, it just makes an incredibly yellowish orange pasta dough. It looks like sunshine. All right, so now I'm going to fold the dough. And by folding the sides inward, I help to sort of square off the sides a little bit. Your pasta is probably going to round as it runs through the machine. That's fine. This is just to kind of hopefully give it a little bit of a head start. I'm going to give it a little bit of flour as I start rolling. All right, so I'm still on the widest setting. All right, and after this pass, I'm going to now start to decrease the thickness. All right, so I'm at a 2. So I don't want to go to the very thinnest setting because that's going to make sheets that are much too thin and delicate for working in like large slabs. So I'm going to go to, on this pasta machine, a 5, which is sort of, it's like 5 out of 7. So it's thin, but it's not, you know, the absolute thinnest that it will go.
When you're making pasta, how do you know which shapes, sizes, types to go all the way to 7?
If you're doing like a filled pasta, generally you want to go really thin because you're going to get basically a double thickness in a lot of places. Like you're sealing 2 sheets together. So like a ravioli, but a 7 is really, really thin. I don't know that it's just harder to work with that way. And like you could easily kind of like punch through it. So I don't know that I've probably gone to a 7, but for like a strand pasta, you don't want to go that thin because it's just a single piece. All right, so I'm on 3, I'm gonna go to 4. So, you know, obviously you're limited by the width of your pasta roller, of like how large a piece you can roll out. It's kind of a bummer, but I can't get like a 2x2 slab of dough. Do you know what I'm saying? I can't cut it in half lengthwise and get 2 pieces that are the thickness that I need. Okay, so I'm going to 5. You don't want to add so much flour that you dry it out. You just want to add enough that it's not going to stick to itself or to the surface. And I'm using the back of my hands to kind of support it, just to prevent my fingertips from like puncturing or stretching the dough anywhere. So I have my pasta sheet. It's a little long for the counter, so I might actually just do it at an angle.
Did you go to a 5?
Yeah, that was at 5. That last pass was at a 5. Okay, so now I'm gonna cut my sheets. I have my sheet tray behind me with a little bit of parchment paper, or I can transfer the lasagna sheets. And I get a little bit of flour just on the sheet. Using fresh pasta for lasagna is when you start with dry, the noodles expand quite a bit, so you might put down what seems like a perfect layer of like blanched pasta noodles, but then it hydrates as it bakes and like gets bigger. So for this, it expands a little bit when it cooks, but basically it stays the same size. So you can cut sheets that are like very close, almost exact to the size pan that you're using. So this one is about 12.5 inches long and about 3.5 wide. So I'm gonna start cutting sheets of dough. And what I end up with is like, you know, like a single row of perfectly sized sheets and then kind of like half width sheets that I can like basically piece together. Because what ends up happening is the moisture in the dough is trapped by the countertop. Sometimes you get like the underside of the dough is a little bit wetter, so I'm gonna actually just flip it, floured it and flipped it. It's gonna help just to make it easier to remove it from the surface. I'm gonna just cut off this edge. I'm a little short on that side, which is annoying.
How many layers are you planning?
I'm gonna do 100 layers. So basically I'm gonna do as many layers, and I'm gonna do all the layers I can until I run out of one component. Last night I had like a little bit of leftover pasta and a little bit of leftover ricotta filling, and I used all the veg. And I got 7 layers of dough, separated by 6 or so layers. Count each veg as its own layer. That's how you, right? And the ricotta is a layer. Maybe the parm is a layer, and the tomatoes are a layer. The pan. So it's probably like at least 50. So 3.5 this way. All right, so now that I have it marked, I'm just gonna kind of eyeball.
That's not right.
Hold on. Trim. Okay, so now I have, you know what? I can get most of a sheet here if I do it this way. I'm gonna get my first layer of my lasagna sheets down. I'm not drying these, we're gonna cook them directly. It's okay if they dry out some, that's perfectly fine, but I don't need to like hang them to dry. That was the first half of the dough. I'm gonna roll out the second half exactly the same, and then we're gonna go over and blanch them, basically just boil them. So I'm gonna get some salted water boiling in my stock pot behind me. Each sheet takes less than a minute, maybe like 30 seconds or so in the water. I kind of like bathe it a little first so that nothing sticks. And it's gonna set the egg, kind of wash off any excess starch, and they're actually really easy to work with. So I'm gonna put a little oil down just to prevent sticking, and when all my sheets are cooked, then we assemble.
You cook them first and then just store wet sheets? You don't cook them while you're making the layers?
So last night I cooked them to order, like I cooked them as I was assembling because I didn't want to deal with sticking, but then I did a test where I cooked like some of the scrap pieces, and like there will be some sticking, but it's not that bad. It's manageable if you put a little bit of oil down.
Cool. That's a lot easier.
Yeah. It's hot in here. I'm already running the dishwasher. That's how many dishes I've already made. It's going to be worth it, is what I keep telling myself. But it's time to assemble. I have my Pullman pan here. Again, if you don't have a Pullman pan, because it's like not a common thing, you can use a couple loaf pans, or you can just do this as a regular lasagna. I have a piece of parchment, which is gonna help me unmold everything. And I oiled the bottom so that it sticks, and I'm just gonna put a little bit of olive oil on the bottom of the parchment. So this is not a lasagna where I'm like browning the top at all, and I have no red sauce, so I'm not doing any sauce on the bottom. I'm just gonna go right in with a layer of pasta, and I'm gonna go in very thin layers until I run out of something, and that's it. So right in the bottom, I have a little bit of overhang, but I'm not gonna trim it. Now I'm gonna snip my pastry bag, about a 1-inch opening. This is why you want it in a piping bag. It's just much easier to pipe this mixture. So I'm gonna pipe kind of like a snake, kind of thin snake, or like a really wide S basically. I'm not gonna smooth it out. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my thin layers of cooked veg to kind of, like I'm gonna place it over the ricotta and just press down, and it's gonna help flatten everything. So I'm gonna do, you know, a few pieces of eggplant per layer, and then a couple pieces of zucchini. And the idea here is like full coverage. So a complete layer, but very thin layer. I'm gonna scatter a few tomatoes over the surface, kind of just dotting here and there. And each component is seasoned, so I don't have to worry about adding more seasoning at this stage. Now a few basil leaves, I'm gonna leave them whole, and a sprinkle of parm, not a lot, just kind of a coating, and then more pasta. So there's a little parm below the pasta and a little ricotta above, and that's to help having those cheese layers on either side of the pasta sheets help to like adhere everything and kind of cement everything together. So that to me is important in terms of construction. Back to pasta. And when you place that pasta over the like tomato basil parm layer, flatten it really well. And this is going to help to burst the tomatoes and like make them spread out a little bit. And you want to eliminate air gaps. That's really important. And now same thing, ricotta, veg, tomato, basil, parm, pasta, repeat. One concern here is the amount of olive oil that's in this dish. When I made it last night, I boiled the noodles pretty much as I was layering. And so they didn't actually get like an extra coating of olive oil the way that these noodles have. And like, I think I started this process, I think my olive oil squeeze bottle was full. But there's olive oil here and here and here, so it's not all making it in. But the point is it's gonna be pretty oily, but when we griddle it, some of that oil is gonna come out. But also the one that I made last night doesn't have quite as much oil. All right, so I'm gonna use the rest of the tomatoes and any like garlicky bits that are in there, basil. Really how it gets served is like a cross section. So there's not really a top or a bottom. Okay, so the rest of the parm. And then my final layer of pasta, I actually ended up using all of the full sheets, and so now I have some of the kind of half pieces, which is fine. I'm just gonna overlap them. There's gonna be a little bit of like a thicker layer on top. And I'm going to trim. So this is now fully assembled. What I wanna do is take that parchment paper and fold it over, and I wanna press. I really want to get any air out of there. I want all the layers to flatten. And when I press, like those kind of snakes of ricotta filling that I piped are gonna flatten out. This is gonna be so good. I'm gonna put the top on. If you have a Pullman loaf or any kind of loaf pan that doesn't have a lid, just do foil. My oven is on 325. This is gonna bake, not exactly low and slow, but it's just not gonna bake particularly hot. And we're not going for any browning on the surface the way that you would with like a traditional lasagna, so I'm not gonna uncover it, and it's just gonna go until the egg in the filling is cooked all the way through, like through to the center, and it's gonna take about an hour. We're gonna fast forward a little bit, and I'm gonna pull out the lasagna that I made. I have an identical pan, I made it last night, and it's cold, we're gonna unmold it and take a look at all the layers, and then we're gonna finish it on the griddle. What do you think, 10 pounds? More? 10?
8.5.
I think it's at least 10.
Between 5 and 10.
Between 5 and 10, what? Okay, so I let it cool last night before I put the lid back on and then put it in the fridge. So here you can see it. There's a little bit of condensation. So there's not really a top or a bottom. The idea is that the dish gets served on the cut side. So I'm gonna start cutting from one end. I'm gonna just trim off the edge where there's some like extra pasta overhang and everything. I'm using a serrated knife, which is gonna help get through the tomatoes and that kind of thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 layers of pasta with 7 layers of everything else. All right, so now we're gonna cook these because it's cold, it's nice and set. We wanna warm it up and crisp it up and like make it delicious. So I have my griddle preheating on medium high. I'm gonna get a little bit of oil down, but there's also some oil in here that's gonna kind of like ooze out, so it's gonna get really crispy, and I'm gonna cut a few slabs, probably about 1.5 inches thick. And then grill both sides, probably like 3 minutes per side, and then we're gonna taste. It's like, am I a fine dining chef? Did I just make this? It took forever, and it was a lot of work, but it looks so good. It looks delicious. Like, I love that you can still see the layers. I love like the pops of red from the tomato. I love that every component in here becomes more delicious when it gets griddled. It's like the edges of the pasta get crisp, the tomatoes caramelize even more, the egg in the filling, like, you know, browns and like gives you that toastiness. It smells super garlicky. The garlic in the filling really comes out. And then of course the veg like gets even more caramelized. So it's so pretty, and I love that like every bite is kind of the same, and like peeling off the layers is so satisfying. It almost is not lasagna. It feels like a fresh pasta dish, but just in all these different layers. The moisture in here is perfect. It's like, it's not wet, but it's not dry. And I love that everything in here tastes so fresh. Was it a little more work than I thought it would be putting it all together? Yes, it was. Is it worth it now that I have 2 huge lasagnas filled with like local produce and from my garden? Yeah, I guess that means I win. I definitely could freeze the one that's in the oven now. I would slice it and freeze individual slices and then pull it out and like griddle it. I guess what the lesson here is, like, I really value this time of year, and I really want to like respect and honor the produce right now. And this is how I did. I hope that this time of year is inspiring you, like going to the farmer's market and like buy all the veg you can. It's gonna disappear so fast. And so make the eggplant parm now. you know, make the lasagna, make the summer pasta. You'll regret not having it later. In conclusion, like and subscribe.